And guys, if you want to reach out, then please reach out through the Telegram group for the panelists.
All righty. Just checking if I can be seen. Yes, I can. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our session called the AMA. So the purpose of the session is twofold. Firstly, it's an opportunity for you to get to know the guys on the ground making AI work for our clients and answering those burning questions that you haven't managed to find on Google. I'm your host, Simon Kitende. The topic today is digital transformation. I'm joking. Please don't leave. I know what you're thinking, not another conversation about digital transformation. But on that point, we've seen timeless occasions that our clients really are genuinely trying to embrace this notion of digital transformation in aspects like in AI, but are shackled by the existing infrastructure. Introducing the first step towards digital transformation and the topic for today, which is cloud migration with a twist. So here are some ground rules. As the name says it, Ask Me Anything. It's a free-form webinar where you, the audience, get a chance to pick these gurus' brains. So I expect at least 38 questions. And please, there are no dumb questions. I've also got my questions that the gurus might laugh about, but they will not laugh at your questions. So how it's going to work is that if you've got a question, pop it onto the chat. Then when it's your turn, I'll put you onto the panel and I'd like you to turn on your mic and your camera and go ahead and ask the guru your question. We'll commence this process by introducing the gurus. And then from there, they'll provide you with a quick presentation just to give you time to think of your questions. And then I'll open the floor to questions. And because we are here today, or you guys are here today, you guys get a free voucher, Udemy voucher, to our course, Becoming a Cloud Leader, created by our very own cloud guru who is in the hot seat today, which I'll put towards the end of the chat at the end of the session. So just look out for that. Now, let me see what other ground rules have I included, or actually, I see that. Let me just check something quickly because I'm just seeing that. Oh, okay, Brett, just move on to the next one, and then just move on to the next one after that. Yes, so we are on the right page now. So so I'm going to introduce you guys to our three musketeers. The first musketeer is a cloud ops engineer, and he's truly a gifted engineer because not only does he ensure that our clients' environments are secure for intruders, in his pastime, he practices his penetration testing skills on his neighbor's Wi-Fi. Sorry for mentioning it, Neil, but only if their dogs start barking at night. So just please give a virtual round of applause by clicking on the applause icon in the reaction tab to Neil Potgieter.
Okay.
So now our next musketeer, moving on there, over so softly there. Oh, there we go. Our next musketeer is our cloud lead and cloud architect, who has done his fair share of folding up his sleeves in the legacy world, which is why he is the best advocate of the cloud, having been on both sides of the world. He's passionate about teaching and is a creator of the Udemy course that you guys will have access to after the session. In his pastime, he enjoys having a braai and sharing a crude joke or eight. Please give a virtual round of applause to Brendan De Meyer. I hope I haven't butchered your surname there, Brendan.
We agreed it was going to be the Incredible Bulk.
I was going to mention that one a bit later, but yeah, there we go. And then our final musketeer is also a cloud ops engineer. I've worked really closely with him in the sales front. And not only does he walk the walk on the cloud, he also does the talk with regards to sharing his knowledge, being a cloud certified trainer. And in his pastime, he's an avid gamer. And I hope it's evident in these actual visuals because he has this really boss Ferrari chair that he games with. So ladies and gentlemen, please just give a virtual round of applause to Duran Talhiro. There we go. Thank you for that. So I call them musketeers because they're at the front line of making AI work for our clients. As they battle not just legacy systems, but legacy thinking and bringing them over to the modern way of thinking and modern cloud, which is quite a massive feat because you're not just dealing with technology, you're also dealing with ways of work and changing how people work going forward. So no wonder they have such a crude sense of humor. And I've asked them before the session to please be on their best behavior. So you're going to be getting their best behavior right now. And yeah, thank you, gents. And now I'm leaving the floor now to the gurus. So the gurus, thank you once again for attending this AMA. So just for the interests of our guests, I think it's important for us to go to the basics of this topic. And Neil, what is the cloud? Because I mean, there's so many definitions of the cloud and nuances. So I'd really like you just to unpack that a bit for the audience.
Yeah, so just to cover that very quickly, cloud is basically, in essence, where you would be able to run IT services, your servers, your databases, Kubernetes containers, storage, everything off-prem. So not in a data center that you would necessarily own or manage. So there's the two primary cloud service providers in South Africa, or the biggest role players in South Africa at this stage, are Google and AWS. So that's just high level. It's a place that you can have your servers, all your infrastructure running that's not managed and maintained by yourself in terms of physical infrastructure. So that, yeah, that's high level how we define the cloud. Yeah, the other thing is it's data centers distributed across the world, so there are a whole bunch of advantages there that we'll talk to. I think we can go to the next slide. Cloud migration. So cloud migration is simply taking your existing on-prem infrastructure and migrating it to the cloud. It's a process that you follow as part of a modernization journey, as part of a strategy to improve stability in your environment, or as a cost-saving exercise. So there's a couple of approaches. There's the lift and shift approach, or otherwise known as rehosting, where you literally just take your entire infrastructure as it is, servers, databases, and you migrate them to the cloud as is without any changes. Then you get refactoring, where with refactoring, you make some modifications in order to optimally use the cloud resources at your disposal, but it's not a whole rewrite of the application. And then you get replatforming, where you take your application and see, okay, so there are cloud native services that are potentially better fit to manage services that are potentially better fit for what you're needing to achieve. So you'd migrate your application, and as an example, if you have a Redis dependency, you could go manage Redis. If you have a containerized environment, you could go manage container services. So that's just around the replatforming. I think we can go to the next slide. So why move to the cloud? This is a very valid question. So there are different reasons that people want to move to the cloud. Limitations in terms of on-premise architecture. So availability of hardware resources, CPU shortage is a good example. Guys needing new servers are ordering and having 6 to 8 weeks lead time because there aren't servers available in country to deploy into their data centers. Another reason could be for stability. If the current infrastructure isn't very stable, if they're having a lot of outages, disks are failing, that sort of thing. And then obviously the decay of legacy infrastructure. So as your infrastructure starts to get older and starts to deteriorate, the performance goes along with that, and you can't take advantage of some of the newer technologies that we actually have at our disposal to ensure stability and scalability and all the rest. The other reason which will be spoken about in a bit in the next couple of slides as well, is the cost associated with running a data center. So if you're running a data center, you have to consider things like your cooling, the space costs, the power costs, redundancy. Do you have issues when ESCOM goes down? So there are those kinds of considerations as well. So that's why a couple of reasons why some people would consider a move to the cloud. Oh, and most importantly, you don't want to sit in the data center trying to troubleshoot. We've been there. A lot of us have been there over weekends in the middle of the night, replacing storage, replacing memory. With a move to cloud, you don't have any of that hassle.
Some of us more than others, Botti. Thanks for 2018.
It's my pleasure, Brendan. Thank you for being a champion, man. So yeah, in terms of the risks attached to the outdated tech, I'm going to hand over to Doreen. Doreen will talk us through some of the risks and those sort of things.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, so these are basically some of the risks that are attached to outdated tech. I think these are like the top 5 ones. I mean, biggest one is basically crashes in system downtime. I mean, if your tech is outdated and it's not being able to cope with the new increased demand that these new applications and new browsers and whatever else that you need to use in them, they end up to crashing. And this basically creates a whole lot of system downtime, which, I mean, for those of us that have been in IT for a long time, know that this is actually very costly for a lot of companies, simply because downtime means, you know, clients not being served, customers not getting what they need out of the system, even staff not getting what they need out of the system, which can also lead to decreased productivity. So you end up spending more time fixing your systems than actually utilizing them to increase your customer satisfaction, or, you know, keeping that sorry, I'm lost for words. But yeah, it's basically you, instead of you serving the customers and helping them with what they need to get done, which is what your business priority is, you are now spending a lot more time fixing servers and fixing networks and, you know, fixing all of these things, which of course then lead to increased costs, because not everything is done in-house. A lot of companies tend to, you know, outsource these services to companies, to vendors, and we basically, because now they're billing you for time, billing you for hours for fixing these networks every time it crashes, it leads to increased costs for the company. And on the other hand, also, you know, with outdated tech, sometimes they don't, or they go out of scope when it comes to the legal and regulatory compliance risks. So, you know, I mean, every company goes through technical audits, they go through security audits, and having outdated tech can put the company at risk for being outside of the scope for these. And it also gives you a bit of a problem when it comes to security as a whole, because if your tech is outdated, there's a lot of security holes that start opening up within your environment. And I mean, we all know in today's day and age, hackers are extremely creative, and that basically creates loopholes in your system. And if there is any sensitive data that's sitting within your system, it's now at risk of being exposed to the general public. We can move into the next slide. So benefits of being in the cloud. I know Neil touched on this a bit earlier, but just to reinforce what he said. So I mean, efficiency and cost reduction. Cost reduction comes from a place of where sometimes running things on premise, we cannot actually scope out whether the VMs or the servers are being underutilized or overutilized. Whereas in cloud, they're consistently monitoring these things. I know, for example, with Google Cloud, as a server is running for a period of time, it's able, after a while, they do tell you whether you can save money, and they can actually tell you how much money you can save if you reduce the size of the VM. When it comes to data security, this is actually something we were talking about earlier today. So basically with Google, I mean, the data is secure, whether it's in transit or at rest. I mean, they've got so many different security measures in place at so many different layers, all the way from their bare metal to the digital side of their business. So security is really a big focus here when it comes to these public cloud providers. And then you've got scalability. So like Neil mentioned earlier, you know, where CPU usage becomes a problem, you don't have that problem in the cloud. You know, you can provision servers that have massive amounts of CPUs with massive amounts of RAM and massive amounts of storage. Even if you need them for a short period of time, it's just a matter of provisioning it, using it, and then removing it or deleting it afterwards if it's not needed. And then we come to unlimited storage capacity. So when it comes to unlimited storage capacity, you're looking at you know, different types of storage that's available in the cloud. You know, you've got your archiving, you've got your storage that's used on a regular basis, you've got those that's used for you know, audit purposes. So there's many different ways that storage can be used in the cloud. And unlimited basically means it's not particularly extremely unlimited, but I mean, they do have a massive amount of storage available for people to use when it comes to storage capacity. And then one of the nice things about cloud is you've got access to a wide range of IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS products that are within the cloud. So IaaS being, you know, your things like your VMs, your networks, your firewalling, your security, those type of things. When you come to PaaS, it's things like your Kubernetes engines, your app engines, Beanstalk, all those different platforms that are available within the cloud. And then what's nice about cloud is they've also got a lot of SaaS products. So I know within Google and AWS, they both have their marketplaces that have specific softwares that's already set up and able and ready to use. So it's just a matter of provisioning it, and they do the entire setup for you, and also give you the costs of what it's going to cost you on a per month basis. And the other thing is managed services. So when it comes to a point of view, you know, I mean, let's take, for example, building a Kubernetes system on premise. Google has that already and available for you to provision within cloud. It's also scalable to what you need it to. It's got all the network set up. You know, it's just a matter of a few click-throughs going through the wizard, and you can essentially set up a full Kubernetes stack. One of the other things that's not on this slide is also, you know, when you're moving on to cloud, you're turning your CapEx into an OpEx. So instead of forking out, you know, millions of rands every 5 years to upgrade your infrastructure, you're basically using the latest infrastructure from the get-go, and you're basically just paying for it on a monthly basis. Can you go to the next slide? Cool. I'm going to hand over to Brendan to talk you through saving costs.
All right. Thanks, Doreen. Thanks, Neil. Doreen has gone through a lot of the aspects of the cloud that make it a great place to be. There's risk reduction, those sorts of things, and one of the things that we always try to touch on is cost, because cloud is always seen as something that has an attached cost, and it does. I mean, it's not free. They're not doing this for love and money, or for love and charity. Sorry. So we just thought let's take a look at 3 of the tips that we often use in our day-to-day to save our customers or our clients money when using the cloud, and what you can do sort of upfront to make sure that, you know, your cloud migration isn't going to really break the bank, because I've seen it happen before where organizations say, we want to go to the cloud, we're going to do this, we're going to get everything there, and then it just becomes too expensive an exercise. And there is that risk, there's that tipping point whilst you're running in a hybrid phase, but we'll talk about that shortly. So the first thing that we always want to do when we're looking at cloud migration, and the first thing I'm going to ask the client to do, is make sure that we actually know what's going on-prem, right? Give a great baseline of their footprint, understand that environment, and see, okay, cool, how much of this is going to end up in cloud, first of all? How much of it is going to end up in cloud in the exact same configuration? And, you know, is there sprawl? Because there's always sprawl. I've never seen an environment where there isn't sprawl. So That's the first cost saving tip. Let's get that baseline right. Let's understand what moves, what should move and what shouldn't move, because some stuff just shouldn't move. Some stuff should be earmarked for modernization. Then the second cost saving tip is using hyperscaler native solutions where we can. Now, this is often a weird thing to say to someone because isn't all of the solutions hyperscaler native? Not necessarily. In our on-prem world, we used to a lot of sort of third-party OEMs, different toolings, different virtual appliances that enable the way we interact with the outside world. So specifically like at the firewalling tier or at the load balancing tier or at the, the web application firewall tier, we've seen a lot of ways to reduce cost by just using what the hyperscalers give us without having to engage a third-party OEM like a Fortinet as an example, or a Cisco. But I'm not throwing out names here. I'm just using those as examples to highlight using, Azure front door versus a full-on Cisco sort of WAF solution. That often saves you a lot more money in the long run, and it gives you a lot more flexibility. And because it's so deeply integrated, you tend to get a better, richer experience in your setup. So using those hyperscaler native solutions works in your favor from a cost perspective. The third thing is don't be shy about who sees what the cloud costs, right? You have a lot of engineers working consistently at making a cloud experience positive. And one of the things that they shy away from is that, oh, it's cloud, it's unlimited. They need to see the costs. They need to understand what it costs. They need to understand what plans we're working with and things like that. That way we can see, okay, cool, this is what we can provision. Or they say, no, we don't want to go with this VM because it's a bit more expensive. Don't hide those costs. Let everyone understand what it costs to actually provision cloud. And then a lot more people are less likely to over provision or sprawl or just keep track of it as they're building in cloud. And not everyone should be building in cloud. You should limit that scope. But the people that are building, let them see the costs, let them understand it, and let them help you manage it. All right, Simon.
Thank you for, sorry. Continue.
All right, so this is a case study, or a bit of a case study that we've spoken on quite extensively on LinkedIn, but it's also a bit of a loaded statement, or a bit of it is a loaded statement, because anything that you do in a hybrid state is going to cost you money in two places, right? And that's the biggest risk to costs in a cloud migration, is how long you live in that hybrid world, because then I'm paying providers on both sides of the fence. And the biggest thing about that is making sure that you migrate quickly enough to avoid that risk, but also not migrate so quickly that you actually introduce system instability and risk on the cloud end. So when we say able to save an organization up to 60%, we started employing smart technologies within our cloud estate to reduce their risk from a network perspective, but also not have to cut out a lot of licensing. So that 60% would have been actually realized upon completion, right? So if you take a look at it, we take 1 year to migrate, so year one, they're on-prem, year two, we're in the migration phase, year three, we're in cloud. The comparison between year 3 and year 1 would have been 60%. The year 2, that middleman, is where you have to manage the little hybrid state. And that's the biggest thing as well. Make sure that you're not in hybrid for too long, because that's when you'll see the options to back out of cloud. All right. So to get us opening up to questions a lot more quickly, I've just got a few last tips about the before and after, and sometimes even during the move, but mainly focus on the before. Right, so we've spoken about this, not from a cost perspective, but even just from a logistics and planning and knowing what your environment looks like, baseline your environment. Before you move, before you put a single bit of IOP in cloud, make sure you know what's going on-prem. And then, this is my tip, and I'm not using this as a shameless sales plug. It's not beyond me, but it's not this case. But work with a specialist partner, right? It doesn't have to be, this latest and greatest, but work with a partner that knows what you're trying to get right, especially if that is an industry-specific partner. So sometimes these boutique firms give you a lot more insight because they are specific to your industry. Or you can even go with the bigger houses, and they don't know what they're doing as well. And I'm going to frame this in such a way that, with all due respect, if your internal team knew how to get you into the cloud, they would have been in the cloud already. So I'm not saying that your internal team doesn't know what they're doing. I'm saying your internal team needs help, right? And that's why we say work with a specialist partner. after the cloud, or even during, right? Because the cloud allows you to turn things on very quickly. So, but after the cloud, make sure that your next step is telemetry. Know what's going on from day one in the cloud. Get your monitoring, your analytics up. Know what your stats are. That'll help you scale up, scale down, scale out. It'll help you make sure that you know what's going on well enough to make the right decisions about your cloud estate. Because if you take it exactly as it is on-prem and you just dump it in cloud, your costs are going to be the same, if not worse. Your experience is going to potentially be the same, if not worse. You don't need that. You need to be a bit more intuitive in the cloud. So look at your monitoring, make sure that you're keeping an eye on what's going on, and get that information in. It's something that every single client has complained about. I don't know what's going on in my environment. How do I get eyes into this? Those sorts of things. The cloud gives us all these tools. You can go for it. And then the next thing to do is you need to start modernizing, right? Just because you're in the cloud doesn't mean you're actually in the cloud, right? You've reduced your risk, you've managed certain costs, you've gotten yourself to a better performance point, but you need to look at modernization. If I'm just taking one VM into the cloud to leave it as a VM, that is just leaving myself there in the same space for 10 years. I'm not going to actually rework my business. So we want to go take a look at then, using the platform solutions, because that's when we start unlocking real costs or real cost savings. Sorry, we don't want to unlock more costs. So with the modernization approach, that is where you ideally need to then start working on the minute you get into cloud. So don't wait a year, don't wait 2 years. That should be day 2 in the cloud. How are we going to start modernizing this? What are we going to start doing this? So then you go into the next sort of hybrid phase, but you're in cloud, so your risks are managed. And that's sort of my story for that portion. So I think we can jump into questions.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to promote Kirsty, and she's going to ask her question. I see, Kirsty, you've got 2 profiles. I'm going to put both in, and if you feel okay, let me just then allow you to ask your question to the audience. Okay, I can't see you. Let me try this. Let me ask you. Great. Kirsty, can you talk?
Hello.
Yes, great. What is your question?
So my question is, in what cases would it not be ideal to migrate?
I'll take this one. That's an interesting question, because almost everyone, and especially all the hyperscalers, are going to be the first to tell you everything works in the cloud. Some applications just aren't ready for it. Some they might just be too legacy or too intertwined into your on-premise environment that it's not feasible. And this is why we harp on about baselining your on-premise environment to identify those real, this is going to break, we can't do this. So that might be a situation. There might be certain circumstances where data sovereignty really causes a blocker, although that is becoming less and less of a scenario. It is something that you still really need to consider. Can this data actually live in the cloud, especially where I want to deploy it? And then once again, location might cause some issues. We've seen it with really latency sensitive systems and applications. You might just be too far away from your customer, depending on where you deploy your cloud, and it might just break the customer experiences, which you don't want to do. So then sometimes you want to look for alternatives. Although the hyperscalers are spacing out a lot more, so they're rolling out a lot more infrastructure, which means that that's becoming less of an issue as well. But there are scenarios where this will happen. So legacy applications, or applications that will definitely break once you decouple them without knowing what's going on, or some data sovereignty or legal requirements. And then technically, you just don't want to ruin your customer experience just for the sake of cloud. You might have to wait a few months before a hyperscaler to come close to you, or change your hyperscaler decision.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry,
I
I just want to add to that. Sorry to interject there. So in those sort of scenarios, often what would work is having a look at if it's related to a specific application, what is your strategy around the modernization of that specific application? Because there are things that we can do to get that application to a point where it does make sense to migrate to the cloud. And then what we would do is as part of your cloud journey, we'd modernize into cloud directly. So we
Yeah.
wouldn't first modernize on-prem and then move it to cloud. We'd, as part of the modernization of those components, we'd actually move them to cloud.
Yeah, you'd always modernize into cloud, but there might be some things that you just say, I'm going to park you for now, leave you in a safe, happy space, not touch you just yet. So we're not saying not cloud. We're just saying not yet.
100%.
Thank you for that. I hope it has answered your question. I just want to have a follow-on question to that, where you're just talking about modernizing directly or leapfrogging to modernization. In what scenarios do you do that? Because I've seen with the general state, we always lift and shift and then try to the modernization journey.
So from that perspective, there might just be a code base that is just too old. There might be CPU or storage or sort of code execution dependencies that create these breaks. It is very rare and very few and far between. So I'm not going to say, be on the lookout for it around every corner, but it does happen. There might also be scenarios where a dev team is literally in the middle of a refactoring to microservice these things. And you don't want to go and break that process because they're going to have a really good experience once they're there anyway. So it might just be a case of let's put the brakes on this piece of code right now, let them finish that up and then move it into the cloud.
Yeah.
Right. There might also be a scenario potentially where there might be a decision between two different systems, and then a budgetary restraint comes up and they say, well, let's wait until the next financial year. So once again, I'm not saying it's not going to go to cloud. I'm just saying it's not going to go to cloud yet, or this functionality will exist in cloud in a different format.
Yeah.
So those are the sorts of things that you need to look at, but these scenarios are very, very few and far between. And we seldom come across issues where you can't get something into cloud.
Okay, no, thank you for that. So I see Irene asked a question, but it's actually Justin has asked it. So I'm just going to ask Justin just to step in and ask you a question.
So my question is basically, what is the best way to bring your existing team from on-prem to cloud? Because obviously you don't want to hire an entire new team or replace your existing team, but they might not have the skills or knowledge to run it in cloud. So how do you transition your team as well as your technology at the same time?
That's a good question. If you don't mind me just jumping in there. So one of the approaches is to, as part of the strategy to migrate to cloud, get the whichever cloud service provider you've opted to go for, to give training. There are so many materials available online in terms of upskilling in the context of cloud and cloud services. There's no reason why someone can't do a Udemy course, as an example, as a starting point, in order to upskill, at least so that they can develop a basic understanding, and then from there potentially go and do a certification. There's also all the cloud platform providers offer really good learning paths that you can follow. So the recommendation there would obviously be, so that your core team would, at least you'd want your core team to understand the fundamentals, but your core technical team that's actually going to be working on the solutions need to go through the training journey, so that they fully understand the intricacies involved.
And maybe just a question to add on to that, like, how do you ensure, because obviously the first thing that comes to mind when people hear cloud is, oh no, I'm going to lose my job. How do you sort of sensitize to them the fact that you're not going to use a job, you're going to be repurposed? Like, how do you go through that process? Because I'm sure you've experienced it in the trenches.
That is the easiest thing to do, because all we are doing is we're making their lives easier. 90% of the time, the guys, especially if the teams, everything into GCP, AWS, hybrid, doesn't matter. By moving it onto a cloud service provider, it gives them a consolidated view, and ease of management of that infrastructure is a lot simpler.
I also just want to elaborate a bit on that. When I spoke to the choice of a specialist partner or a migration partner, that also impacts the way that this decision gets handled, because you will get scenarios where an army of consultants will walk in there like rhinos and make the team feel like, this is our show, you guys sit on the side and get us coffee. Your choice of partner in that scenario will help you with that change management process, because it is a nerve-wracking thing. I mean, everyone who's made the transition to cloud, especially from a legacy world, knows just how really daunting it can be, because it's literally 3 months upskill to be able to deliver an enterprise solution that took you 10 years to build. So there's a lot of nervousness around that. So if you're going to bring a specialist partner, and make sure you're going to bring the sort of partner that's going to take the hand holding and say, this is the journey sort of situation, not necessarily the this is my show, leave it be. So that's a consideration. And this is why the boutique partners typically don't want to be around forever to support and manage the environment. They want to get you there and get you enabled.
Yeah.
And then typically be around for like, oh, we want to expand, or oh, we ran into a major problem, those sorts of things. But they don't typically want to sit there for the next 15 years making sure everything runs.
I think just to add to that also, I mean, with Neil saying that, we want to make their jobs easier, and that is the truth. We don't, what we find a lot is within these, within on-prem data centers, there's always fires to be fought. Storage is not working, or something has gone down, the networks have gone down. So instead of, utilizing that time to fix systems continuously, they can now focus on things like innovation and repurposing, and, making that the environment and the technology better so that things can run more efficiently.
100%, yeah.
Thank you for that. So Tianella, I'm sorry if I butchered your name. I'm just going to put you on the podium. Please ask your question.
Hi guys, I hope everyone's well. I just wanted to ask more about how me as a student who's studying computer science can get into this field of cloud computing.
Good question.
Let's take this one.
I'm going to run with that one.
Yeah, please.
The field of cloud is massively wide.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing that you say you want to get into cloud. Technically, if you're going into any form of technology role these days, is going to be cloud based. I'm not even going to try and sugarcoat that. Everything that you do in the future will be in cloud. It's very, very unlikely that students coming in there are not going to get cloud experience. So I think what you need to do, as from your perspective, is that you need to explore what sort of directions the cloud goes in, and see what works best for you. Because if you're currently doing CS, there might be a heavy development swing to your studies, and is that what you want to do or not? If you are leaning towards the infrastructure side of things, then you might want to go a bit more vocational. So then you can look at vendor related certifications on top of your CS studies, and that'll just make you a bit more of an all-rounder with a nice infrastructure focus. If you want to go the security route, as an example, once again, that's a lot more vocational and a lot more vendor based, but it also is a very, very experience heavy role. You don't just study for 2 years and walk into security, as an example. So those are some of the things that you want to take a look at. And then if you want to go the data side, which is a very, very interesting thing, and it's one of Teraflow's specific strong points, there's, once again, your CS degree is going to be amazing for that. And then you might want to go and augment that with some specific some modeling tooling like R and getting your tooling right there. And that's, once again, short courses, vocational, that you can get into. And once you figure that out and you start finding sort of this is the niche that you want to fall into in the world of cloud, it'll be easier to target your job hunting, your intern hunting capabilities to find that right role that's going to make it work for you. So I'd like to say that the first step is figure out exactly what side of cloud you want to fall in.
I was generally thinking about cybersecurity.
Okay, so once again, cybersecurity, very, very specialized, very, very vocational. So, but also very much going into it's coming from a lot of a coding background as well. All I can honestly say is cybersecurity is not a I finished studying in 2 years and I'm cybersecurity qualified. It's a long journey. So it's going to take you a couple of years and a lot of vocational experience to get it right. But it's probably one of the more thrilling sides of cloud at the moment, and one of the rarest skills. So you're hitting it hard at the moment. So that's great if you want to go that route. So start looking for the vendor-specific certifications that are going to get you there, and start looking for the right sort of interning that's going to get you there. So internships are available for it. The cybersecurity community is typically quite wary. So when they take someone on, they really want to see that potential. So get those vendor certificates going, and then that gets them open to you a bit more, and just prepare for a good few years.
All right, thank you.
I just want to add to that. So when Brennan's saying vendor specific stuff, so the learning paths that AWS has, that GCP has, that a majority of the cloud providers have, they will take you through a general journey in terms of, if we're talking cloud security specifically, the journey typically consists of engineering, a little bit of dev in cloud, and then a transition into information security. But there are clear learning paths defined in terms of best route forward to get you to a point where you are confident in yourself and your own abilities, and comfortable with the cloud service providers that you're working with. So have a look on Google and AWS at the learning paths. That's the best place to start.
And even like the Microsoft side, especially with their SaaS platforms, because they've got a lot of security built into those platforms. So don't preclude a hyperscaler just because we have preferences. Like especially because everyone uses Outlook as an example, or a lot of people use Outlook and Teams and those sorts of things. So you don't want to ignore that side of the security spectrum.
Yeah, I want to add to that. So while the certificates and all of that are extremely important, I do think also it may sound a little contradictory with you trying to be a security specialist, but learn how to hack, right? And I'm being honest with you here, because basically a lot of the times is that, and this is where Brendan talks to coming with experience, right? If you know how to hack, you know how hackers think, you know how to prevent them from hacking environments. So, learn how to hack. I mean, there's a lot of different courses on Udemy that teach you how to hack. I mean, there's things on YouTube you can find. Learn how to start hacking, hack simple systems, not corporate systems that don't go crazy, be a white hat hacker. But basically learning the tools of the trade of what hackers do and how they work, and the tools that they use will give you a better understanding of how they think, and therefore will allow you to have the extra edge when you go into these roles, because now you've got the mindset of a hacker and you know to prevent them from entering the systems. So, yeah.
All right, thank you guys.
Hope he helped you out there. So yeah, definitely a lot of certs, and yeah, just choosing what hyperscaler fits what you want. So I'm just going to ask Ryan to jump on the podium and please ask your question. And by the way, guys, I'm loving the questions and loving the activity. Keep them coming. Ryan, over to you.
How's it, everybody? So I don't know if I can turn my camera on, but the guys from Teraflow know me well. So I know Neil and Darren and Brendan well, and you don't have to convince me, but I'm in a new environment where cloud is a completely foreign concept to the Exco. So it's a little bit of a harder sell. So to elaborate a little bit more on my question, they're used to a traditional on-prem environment where, every 3 or 4 years, you'll refresh some hardware, a bill comes along, the CFO signs it and pays for it, and off you go. And the concept that they're really having a tough time understanding, and I suppose I'm also maybe having a tough time explaining, is that, eventually once you've done your cloud migration, you're going to get a monthly bill for your cloud services. So that's what I wanted some elaboration on. What's the sell? How do we sell that to the Exco and to the people signing off the checks?
I actually think that's probably a perfect Simon question. How do you sell cloud, guys?
I've got a way. Just keep plugging the network. Eventually, they'll. By the way,
just repeat it again. Yeah, we lost you.
Yeah, we lost you there for a second.
I said just keep unplugging the network. They'll realize that they need to get stability into the infrastructure, and it will be an easy sell.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm going to kick off with one quick suggestion here, and it's something that probably we've done once or twice where it's worked, and let's not get the whole thing. Let's not go to the Exco and say all cloud all the time, please. Let's find that one little piece. And it could be a small piece, it could be a relatively big piece, or it could just be an annoying piece of the infrastructure that you want to get there. And you get it there, and then you start showing them the benefit of this. And just that one piece, a small enough bill to not really annoy the CFO. And like a common thing was often mail, right? Email is always a quick win, because let's get your mail onto 365 as an example. And then you've got mail everywhere. Mail doesn't go down. Mail's always delivered. You don't have limitations on your mailbox. There's no one complaining about email systems not being down. We don't have firewalls to worry about. And then you take the Teams component as an example. And you take that and say, fine, let's get rid of a few phones. Let's get rid of our phones. Let's get Teams calling in. And those little components that won't necessarily rock the boat too heavily, but it'll be enough impact for them to see, oh, wait, maybe we should open ourselves up more to the cloud. And you need to get them asking the question, so what else can go into the cloud? That's the sort of stuff that's gotten it right for me, especially when there's systems that fail that are small systems. I mean, often like a small little accounting server, or a small little booking system that just annoys them every time it goes down. You get that one thing. It's not a major push and it's not a major expense, but that stability of it going into cloud and then working all of a sudden consistently often convinces them that this is a better way to go about it. But I see Brett also has his hand up, so he might have some
I
views
think
on this.
Brett's also a great example to talk from a sales perspective. So jump on, Brett.
Hey guys, sorry, I'm just on a plane at the moment. What? Terrible joke. It's my only background. So Ryan, you got a very, very good point, and you actually need to tackle it in two ways. So when you're talking to your Exco team, my advice is cash flow. It's really difficult to manage these bulk payments, whether it's upgrading infrastructure or planning on a new set of infrastructure. And it's difficult in two ways. So if you have a new product or you have a new system that you would like to launch into your business, the teams have to find the money to be able to put that up front. And they tend to overspec the service, right? Because you've got to make sure you've got this capacity to deal with hopefully a lot of people using the platform. So cash flow is a great place to hit on the Exco level. Now, have a chat to your CFO. Your CFO will probably love the fact that they can depreciate assets. So holding the asset and then depreciating it over time, that's difficult to beat. They will like the fact that they're able to pay out on a monthly basis and not have to fork out any interest to cover that capital. But a very strong point for the CFO is going to be around the fact that no longer do they have to worry about depreciation, which is a bonus, but upgrades, maintaining it, the staff to keep it up and running. It's all those kind of hidden costs that sit under different GL codes that are not necessarily attributed to the initial hardware costs. And so the CFOs love that because they are aware of those costs where a lot of the other excos aren't. So they do have the benefit of depreciation. All businesses love to depreciate capital assets, but having all these hidden costs that they're aware of and to be able to not account for them anymore is also a great savings. So those would be my kind of two tips for you, Ryan. Give that a bash and see if it works. I'd love to know if it works.
No, it will. I mean, I think we just, again, I want to take up too much of other people's time, but we're in this situation where we have an old production system and we have a new production system, and the hardware on the new production system is only a year old. But the reality is, as that system grows, it's going to need to grow somewhere. So the idea is to take that system and ultimately just grow it into cloud whilst we turn the other one off and decommission it completely.
Yeah, if you can do that, fantastic. Again, depending on the application stack, but that's your ideal world, right? Slowly grow it out, and then once you're at the point of depreciation, cut it out of your system because you don't want to waste that money. That's the other. Brendan spoke to it a bit. It's the in between stage. When can I get rid
so I mean,
of
for me it's like a 2-year journey now. I've got 2 years to try and grow the new stack into the cloud, and by the time we're done with that, then great, then I can just the other stuff is completely depreciated and we can just turn it off and decommission it.
Excellent, good approach.
Ryan, I hope you are happy with the answers.
Perfect, thank you so much, everyone.
No worries. James, you have a really good question. I'm just going to ask you I'm going to put you on the podium, and I think the guys are going to really like this shared responsibility question. So please just ask your question, James.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. I think it's quite important to understand that there are many different cloud applications that one can look at using. And one of the concerns, and you speak about Exco, you've got CIOs and CISOs who are all looking at, how do you configure the system and who's going to help me and hold my hand here so I don't look like the idiot when it fails. And when I say fail, you're looking at some very, very complex systems like, Salesforce being an example of a cloud platform and by far the most popular CRM. But the risks in configuring it incorrectly or not having your profile set up properly is huge to any organization. I think there's some hand-holding required. And to what extent do you guys do that hand-holding, if at all?
Is this specifically, to what extent does Teraflow do that hand-holding? Or
yeah.
To what extent do we expect that any good, cloud partner should do that hand-holding?
Well, I'm asking you, how does Teraflow approach it? Talk about specifically shared responsibility.
So once again, skin in the game is sort of our bread and butter within the realms of what's needed. Every like you said, there's so many applications and things like that, but we want to do the hand holding to the point that the customer is able to look after themselves, but at the same time, we don't just walk away because we identify risk. And especially with something like a Salesforce, like you said, which is even in the cloud world, it's relatively niche. And the other thing that hampers, or not hampers that, but sort of impacts how involved we get is how much does the customer actually know. One of our big blockers has often been like the business analysis case, where we walk into the customer says, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. And then we say, okay, but what have you got? And why do you want this sort of situation? So I think the hand-holding starts with the business analysis, and we start from that point. Right, helping you define those requirements, because a CIO and a CISO don't often even have their business requirements mapped out from that regard. So Teraflow gets involved when the client wants at that level. And in fact, it's made our deployments a lot easier. So we will come and sit and figure this out with you, write the business case, things like that, get it to the point where it's financial sign-off, obviously, and then go through the implementation and make sure that we always revert back. So we work in that sprint methodology, and our sprint zero concept is where we basically go and make sure that the client has figured out what they want, and that we have figured out what the client wants in a language that the client understands. And then we handhold until such time as that brief is met. And where there's scope creep or scope changes, or all of a sudden a pivot in the way the business operates, because that's going to happen, we then refer back to that sprint zero process. So if we need to all of a sudden have a secondary sprint zero to go and refigure out requirements because the CIO says we're taking the business in a new direction, by all means, then we start that again. But I think the involvement doesn't necessarily say how far we go. I think the involvement is more to the point of how early do we get involved. And that's a bit of a differentiator for us as Teraflow.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brendan. That's very useful.
Thanks.
Okay, so Jabulani's question is it possible to run the entire infrastructure on the cloud with the VMs and application? And how are the costs in that case? Gurus.
Putty, I think you and Doreen can take this one. I've spoken enough.
Sorry, just repeat that.
So is it possible to run and please, Jabulani, just correct me if I get it wrong. Is it possible to run the entire infrastructure on the cloud with the VMs and the application? And what are the costs in that case? So I'm not quite sure if he's talking about the distinction of, So I think maybe just answer it the way that it's been framed.
Duran?
Yeah, so Jabulani, I would say yes. I mean, in a perfect world, provided like Brendan mentioned earlier, depending on your application, depending on the operating system that it's running on, depending on a few different factors. Let's assume that this application is up to date. Let's assume that the operating system is up to date. You can definitely run all your infrastructure on cloud. It has the capabilities to do that. It has the scalability to do that. You can even take it a step further. You can then say, you know what, this application's been running on VMs for a couple of years. Let's now refactor it. Let's modernize this application. And if you want to cut costs in that matter, you would say, you know what, let's microservices application and let it run on a microservice infrastructure so that you're not using a monolithic server, you're more using a horizontally scalable system rather than a monolithic system. You can even go as far as saying, you know what, I want to refactor my databases from a SQL server running on a VM to a managed SQL server that's running within cloud. That would also decrease costs within cloud. And by having it as a managed service, basically your application would scale up and scale down according to requirements or traffic or demand based on your customers. And by doing that, you're basically not having this massive server that's running 24/7, but rather having your application running at specific needs depending on what the demand is. So if you got 1,000 clients that you're serving in 1 hour and 1 million clients that you're serving in another hour, it would scale up to meet that need and then scale down scale down back to zero if that's required when it's not in use. So in that way, you can save a lot of costs, and you can also run all your infrastructure within the cloud.
Yeah. Maybe just to add to that, there is a bit of a misconception that you can't run monolithic infrastructure in cloud, or that it won't perform as well on the cloud as it will on premise. That is a complete misconception. So in some cases, we do need to put down tin in an extended data center as part of the cloud, or as part of your cloud deployment, in some very special cases. But monolithic applications run perfectly fine in the cloud. The advantage you have by moving a monolithic into the cloud as a lift and shift initial approach, just to get your infrastructure secured and scalable, is that you have that additional scalability. You have the additional protection in terms of the security rules and protocols that you can have in place. And it is, so it is a misconception that I think often comes up in our world, where, oh no, it's a monolithic application, we can't migrate it to cloud because we first need to modernize. It's not the case. We can lift and shift it and modernize it after the fact. As an example, if your infrastructure is going down once a week, every week, you may want to just lift and shift what you currently have into cloud, just so that your infrastructure is not going down. You're not going to have disk failure issues. You're not going to have network issues. You're not going to have any of that nonsense that's associated with the traditional self-hosted on-prem deployment.
So I just want to elaborate on that. A lot of the cloud providers are also coming out the hyperscalers are coming out with massive, cloud edge solutions. All right, because once again, a monolith is one thing, but being as close to your customer as possible in terms of delivery is another thing. So don't be afraid to embrace the hyperscalers cloud edge solution. It's still within the ecosystem. It just helps you get rid of some of those constraints. Essentially, ideally, in the perfect world, all your data center presence ever is a rack or two across a few co-located data centers where you have your network presence, your network pops. But that's really just it's not always the case. But the hyperscalers are realizing that it can't just all be sitting somewhere in the cloud. Sometimes we need to be able to give them the capabilities and the scalability of the cloud a bit closer to them, or in an environment that makes them feel a bit more comfortable. And that's where cloud edge solutions come in. Azure has a great tool in terms of Azure Stack that can be used for small scale deployments. AWS has Outposts, and Google is also working on tooling around this. So don't be afraid of that sort of stuff to help you bridge that divide between on-prem and in cloud, because cloud edge is still a very real thing.
I think just to maybe add on to that question, just a bit of a nuance, which touched on another question that Justin G asked, in terms of, is there a cloud service provider that's better in one service or better than another in terms of like reaching your migration requirements?
So, sorry, Simon, could you repeat that?
So Justin asked, like, are there cases where one cloud service provider is better than another based on migration requirements?
Let's just make sure Microsoft and Google aren't listening.
We are cloud agnostic.
From my perspective, there are always going to be certain hyperscalers that have their pockets of excellence. Microsoft leads the pack in SaaS. Let's face it. Exchange is an amazing tool. SharePoint's an amazing tool. Teams is an amazing tool. So they really, really do that well. And if I were looking at it with fresh eyes, that would be a consideration. I've always said that when it comes to working with big data and managing massive amounts of data, Google's always done it the best for me. And I might be a bit biased in that, but my argument there is quite simple. They manage to index the internet. They know what they're doing with data. So these are the tools that they use to get that right. AWS is very, very developer friendly, and it's very, very financial institution friendly. And they build out a lot of industry specific solutions, like for the healthcare industries. I'm looking at some of the education tooling that they have for like specifically pre-built, pre-configured sort of education systems. And they do the same for health and the same for banking. And they seem to be loved by a lot of the financial institutions. That also being said, if I am an Oracle house on-prem, Oracle should never be out of the question just because they're not one of the top 3, right? So use Oracle where Oracle is strong potentially. Or as an example, Salesforce. Nothing wrong with Salesforce. Use Salesforce where you need Salesforce. Every cloud has every hyperscaler has a potential niche or specialization, and hybrid multi-cloud is probably the approach that all organizations are realizing this is the way we need to do things. So I'm not going to say Google is best for this and this is the best for this. The mix of them together will give your environment and your migration the best chance to survive.
Yeah, just to add to what you're saying there, Brendan, I think you did mention this before, was it also depends also like on latency sensitive applications that you may have, So at this point, AWS has a data center sitting in Cape Town. Depending on whether the data can be moved out of the country or not. I think mostly with your medical and banking data, they need to stay within the country. So, I mean, there's also those considerations that you need to take into account, whereas with Google, they haven't mentioned any specific date that they're going to be dropping a data center in South Africa. We do know that it's coming, but, those are also some considerations that need to be taken into account.
Hope that answers your question, Justin. I'm just going to answer one more question, and the rest of the questions, I'll just send a response back from the team since we are running out of time. So I think just for the last question, which I think is quite a nice one, Thabiso, can you please jump on the podium and ask the last question?
Thank you very much. Are there any requirements, say a company wants to move to the cloud? What is needed so that the company can successfully migrate to the cloud?
So look, I think in terms of your prerequisites, like we mentioned, like Brendan mentioned in the presentation before, it's always, you need to know what's happening in your own environment before you move to the cloud. So in terms of, know what operating systems your servers are running on, know whether they are 32-bit or 64-bit servers, look at your monolithic stacks that are sitting in your data centers. Are they modernized? Not modernized, but are they up to date? Are they on the latest softwares? Do you think that these applications and servers will be able to migrate? And that's something also where someone like Teraflow or Cloud Partner would come in and do the assessments for you to say, what, these amount of servers or these certain servers can move because they would be supported and they would work on a hyperscaler, or these ones would not because they're too outdated and maybe too old. So I think in terms of prerequisites, it's just more knowing what's going on within your environment, how the setup is, having those architecture diagrams and network diagrams of how everything operates, knowing what dependencies your application requires, what does it connect to? Is it connecting to a database server? Is it connecting to a payment engine? Is it connecting to an SRE? All the different parts that make up that application or make up that entire service. are things that we would need as a cloud partner to know before we can actually migrate that up to the cloud.
I think just to add to that, the other prerequisite that would be that in terms of connectivity, if the environment is air gapped, it's not that it's not doable, it will just require an appliance. And a lot of the cloud service providers don't have appliances in South Africa yet. So that's one of the challenges. So if you've got an air-gapped environment that you're planning on moving, it's something that can be done, and arrangements can be made with the cloud providers, but it won't be as simple as, okay, we can start backups to cloud and then start restoring our infrastructure immediately.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hope we answered your questions. And ladies and gentlemen, I know we've gone 8 minutes over time, but really thank you for attending this awesome AMA. If you found the value in today's AMA, it would be great if we can just have a separate conversation with you directly in the next week or so. And we'll also be asking any of the questions we've not answered, and we'll be replying to you since we have your details. And also we'll be publishing this in our YouTube channel, so stay tuned to see your faces. Follow us on our socials. Our Insta handle is teraflow.ai. On Twitter, we're teraflow_AI. And on Facebook, it's just Teraflow AI. Please download our cloud ebook, which will have a lot of these topics that we've been discussing today. And we look forward to seeing you in the next AMA. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Cheers, it's been good.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks.